Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this evening's Guardian Book Club. My name is Lisa Allardice, the Guardian's chief books writer, and my guest this evening is Margaret Atwood. Now, when I do live events with Margaret, I usually have to wait for all the whooping and applause to die down at this point. She's been called a high priestess, the prophet of dystopia, and Elizabeth Moss called her the mother of us all, which I like. But personally, I like to think of her as literature's Mick Jagger, but prettier and far younger looking. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Margaret's most recent book, Burning Questions, a collection of her essays covering most of this century so far, from the aftermath of the Twin Towers attack to the COVID-19 pandemic, with the Obama years, the financial crisis, Me Too, that guy called Trump, everything in between. And there are lots of gorgeous literary essays about great writers, Rachel Carson, Alice Munro, Ursula Le Guin, Doris Lessing, and I particularly love the piece on Anne of Green Gables. So tonight we're in for a real treat because we can talk about pretty much anything. So I've been lucky enough to interview Margaret many times, as you'll probably guess when we're talking. So I'd love to give you all the chance to ask as many questions as possible. Thank you to everybody who sent them in advance. If you feel a burning question coming on at any point this evening, which I hope you do, I think it's really simple. You just stick it in the Q&A box and it will pop up on my screen, and we'll do our very best to answer as many as possible. And do tell us your name and where you're from, but if you're shy, you can just do it anonymously. But don't be shy. So hello, Margaret.
Hello, Lisa, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now I have to say, usually when I do live events with Margaret, she always comes on. What we are missing is not just the applause, but her handbag. She always brings her handbag because you can never be too careful. And she's always wearing fabulous shoes. The last London event, you had an amazing pair of red sort of Dorothy slippers. What are you wearing today?
I'm wearing my Bernie Mavs. Ooh. Very comfy, very portable. You can put them in a suitcase. They don't weigh much, and very useful.
I'm actually in my slippers. Anyway, now, as we are talking about this book, and I was just saying to you before when we were chatting, as a long-term editor, literary editor at The Guardian for years, I read the introduction with something like a burning shame, especially when you mentioned somebody going, please, can you do it with only an hour to spare? You're the only person in the world who can write about your favorite root vegetable or whatever the pressing issue of the day is. Please. But also with a tiny little glow of pride that I might have had any part in occasioning these wonderful essays. It wasn't me, was it? Was it? The beggar wasn't me.
Who else would I be thinking of?
I can officially say that Margaret, if you ask her to do something and she gets the message, she'll say yes on the tarmac. She can write it on the tarmac and we'll file by touchdown, and it will be impeccable and brilliant. So so thank you very much for that. And it's all here, 20 years worth. So the first burning question.
Not all, Lisa. We had to go through 5 times as much to reduce it to what's in the book.
I know you used to send me these things saying, stop, enough. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I've got various little postcards of you with a sort of skeleton saying, I can't, I'm, all of 72 or whatever it was. Now,
whatever it was then.
First burning question, and I think we all need to know the answer to this one. How do you escape a rampaging crocodile? Now, I'm not making this up. This is in the book. So yeah, how do you escape a rampaging crocodile?
So they can't turn corners quickly. So you have to go in a zigzag direction and get trees, if there are any trees between you and them. So don't run in a straight line. That's the short form.
There you go. You heard it here, everybody. More seriously, last time when I interviewed you for the publication of the Testaments, more of which later, which was quite a saga, you said that one of your main reasons for not returning to The Handmaid's Tale sooner, even though fans have been clamoring for a sequel for years, was because it no longer seemed relevant. You said for a long time we were going away from Gilead, and then we turned around and started going back towards Gilead, so it did seem pertinent. And I mean, this has been just so clear just this past weekend with the pro-choice rallies all around the US, protesting against what looks set to be the reversal of Roe v. Wade. We had so many advanced questions about this. And Sean, whether or not it surprised you, whether or not it seemed all too inevitable. And Shauna asks, how can women remain hopeful in a world which seems to be moving backwards in regards to women's rights? So Roe v. Wade, what I know you've written about this for The Atlantic, but we had lots of questions on this.
Yes, well, I've got two pieces on it. One of them is in Burning Questions. And I wrote that for the Argentinians because they had a case there in which a woman went to the hospital, a young woman who didn't know she was pregnant. And in fact, she was having a miscarriage. And she then got charged with having procured an abortion, which was against Argentinian law at that time, and was put in jail for 3 years. So people organized around that, and they did eventually get her out. They did get a change in the law, and they wrote a book about it called Belen, and they asked me to write the introduction, which I did. And the issue that I was talking about there was who owns your body? And if we're going to conscript women and bring in enforced childbirth, which is what it is, then those women, just like men who are drafted for the army, their expenses should all be paid. So they should get their clothing, their food, their lodging, and their medical care, just as if they were in the army, which is the other situation in which the state makes a claim on your services. So that's what I say in that piece. In the Atlantic piece, I look at the leaked opinion, which is an originalist opinion, and you may not be too familiar with that, but originalists believe that they should go back to the original US Constitution, an 18th century document, and use that as a reason for kicking out amendments to it that have taken place since. Well, if you go back to the original US Constitution, women can't have votes because votes for women came in the US in 1920. They're an amendment to the Constitution. They're not in the original. So you can use this precedent. If originalism is used to kick out Roe versus Wade, then originalism can also be used to do away with votes for women, plus a lot of other things. So that's what I'm doing. And I think pro-choice was always a bit of a misnomer. I think instead it should be called against enforced childbirth, which is what it is. So call things by their names. And that is what you are doing if you make childbirth something that women cannot avoid should they become pregnant.
And what about Shauna's question, how can women remain hopeful in a world which seems to be moving backwards in regards to women's rights?
Well, you know, I'm pretty old. Been there, done that. I remember all of the stuff that happened before the 60s, before there were birth control pills, before there were reproductive rights. I remember all of that. And things go backwards, things go forwards, things go backwards and forwards and backwards are relative. They're also a matter of your outlook. So a lot of people think that overturning Roe versus Wade would be forward. And to break this to you, but it's true. On the other hand, only 5% of Americans believe that abortion should be forbidden under any and all circumstances. So should those people prevail, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, which is a fertilized egg in your tube that can't get out, you can die from that, but they would apparently not allow surgery at that point. And this is a religious belief. It is contrary to the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, which says quite clearly, no state religion. They didn't want a state religion. They'd watched what happened in Europe with religious wars, and freedom of worship. So you should be allowed to worship in the religion of your choice, but no state religion. In other words, you should not have other people's religious beliefs forced upon you. Ensoulment is a religious belief. So those people believe that the minute a sperm enters an egg, the fertilized egg has a soul. But souls are a religious belief. They're not a fact. So if you put in laws based on that, you're forcing your religious beliefs on other people, which is against the Constitution of the United States. So I'm just putting that out there. Read the Constitution, you'll see what it says. And then we'll see how far they get with originalism.
I don't think I've ever heard of ensoulment before.
Well, have a look.
I mean, I did when I read your piece, but I think that was
what
the first,
all of this is based on.
yeah.
And when ensoulment takes place has been a matter of debate, not only in Christian societies over the years, but amongst the ancient Greeks, and people have been talking about this for a long time. But the opinions have varied as to when ensoulment actually happens.
It's interesting that you mentioned Argentina, because I so vividly remember the Handmaid's costumes being used as symbols of protest there, as they've been there from Buenos Aires to Texas. And I also wondered if there were sort of glimmers of Atwoodian influence in the green tide of the pro-choice rallies, because they looked rather like, I've got my beautiful copy of the Testaments here, Testaments green. I'm sure lots of people have heard this story now, but it's so wonderful. Where did the idea of the Handmaid's costumes come from?
Well, it has a couple of sources, but one of them, and I could probably show it to you right now if you would like to see it. It's from a 1940s tin of Old Dutch cleanser, which was something.
I have never actually seen it. Have you got it just under your desk, or is that where you keep your crystal ball? Bear with us. I'll do it. So I'm in that routine. There it comes. I should have given poor Margaret, I should have given her warning. Oh, she's not red, she's blue.
Yes, but it's the shape of the costume. So the red comes from color symbolism of medieval and Renaissance religious paintings. Virgin Mary is blue, Mary Magdalene is red. There you are. There she is with her covered up face. So this was something that frightened me quite a lot as a child, as figures with sticks do. If you can't see their faces, actually figures with sticks do anyway, but especially if you can't see their faces. So that was one of the points of origin. Another one was mid-19th century Victorian society, age of covering your face with a bonnet, and of course, nuns' outfits. So lots of precedents, but the immediate and the most peculiar inspiration was the Old Dutch cleanser tin.
Why do you think it's become such a powerful symbol of protest? I mean, we have seen it again this week. All over the place.
Because it's immediately recognizable and it's visual. So we live in an age of television and visual images. If we were still in the age of radio, this would not work, because no one would be able to see the outfit, the people in the outfit. And since they don't make any noise, they wouldn't be able to hear them either. As it is, as symbols of protest, they're immediately recognizable, and they can, for instance, go into legislatures and sit in the audience stands. They're not making any noise, so they can't be accused of causing a disruption, and they can't be evicted for dressing immodestly. Lord knows, they're very covered up. So clever women in Texas figured this out, I think, first, but because we live under the gaze of television cameras and our personal cell phones, these images are immediately recognizable and people know what they mean.
Oh, from an anonymous audience member, please can Margaret show the Dutch cleaner tin again, please? I would love a photo of that inspiration.
I've only had this for a short period of time. A couple of friends of mine, Charlie and Keith, found it somewhere, probably in an antique store. So they just gave it to me.
You got it? I'm hoping you've got it, anonymous. Thank you very much for getting in touch. Now, of course, the other big, very current burning issue is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which your usual spooky timeliness sort of pretty much coincided with the publication of this book. Now, you've said in the past that The Handmaid's Tale was written to answer the question, if there was a totalitarian regime in the US, what form would it take? The Testament sets out to show how such a regime collapses, what makes them turn into something else, what makes them fall apart. Where do you see Putin's Russia at the moment?
Not in a good place for it. Inaccurate estimations of all kinds. Number one, Russian army was mighty and magnificent and would roll over Ukraine very easily. It would all be over in 3 days. Why bother? That turned out not to be true for a couple of reasons. Number one, Ukraine was much more prepared than people thought because they had been anticipating this since 2014. They'd been training, they'd been preparing, they'd been supplying themselves. Number two, the amount of degeneration in Russian military equipment was not known. So people had been looking at May 9th parades and saying, wow, great army. But the actual capabilities and the state of repair was not known. And it turned out that they were throwing in a lot of equipment that was old and hadn't been kept in good repair. And all of this money that people thought had been going into super duper equipment had been going into villas, as it now appears. Number two, you need this many invaders if you're invading another country. You need this many if you're defending. And Russia didn't have this many, didn't have enough. And it didn't have good logistics. And if you're interested in logistics, you should follow a person called Phillips P. O'Brien, a logistics guy who was called this pretty much from the beginning. Logisticians count things. They say, how many trucks, how many tanks, how many, do the tanks have any air support? Apparently not. Do they have any infantry support? Minimal. How vulnerable is the supply line? How easy is it to cut? As we saw with the strung out supply line on the way to Kyiv, it was too strung out. It didn't have enough defensive support and it was easy to cut. And this is the same mistake that Napoleon made when he invaded Russia. By the way, always a bad thing to do, invading Russia. Defending against Russia is one thing, but invading Russia would be a completely different thing to do. So, yes. So what sort of state is Russia in right now? I would say not a very good state because none of the earlier predictions came true. And Ukraine has shown a surprising amount of determination. I mean, surprising to those who weren't already aware of it. And when Zelensky made his famous remark, I don't need a ride, I need, I need ammunition. That wasn't just a moment of bravado because he already knew how well prepared they were.
Now, I'm not going to ask you how you think it's going to end. We all need to listen very carefully to what Margaret says because she has properly official witchy powers for being very spookily and scarily right on a number of things.
I don't have witchy powers.
I remind you of the 2003 Oryx and Crake and the Mad Adam series that featured a pandemic. That'll never happen.
Oh, yeah, I've written about pandemics and the pandemic we're having now is different. It's a natural phenomenon, and the one in Oryx and Crake is man-made. So, and don't go saying this one is because they've rolled back that one too.
Your 2008 book Payback, published just months before the whopping financial global crash.
But what was that based on? I've been looking at ads in the underground, and a lot of them were for, are you in debt? Call us today. So a lot of those, and those ads wouldn't have been there unless there was a big demand for them. So what did that tell us? It told us that too many people were over their heads with the debt and there were going to be defaults, which there then were.
The wonderful series of Alias Grace landed just as we were, the hottest question was, women's stories being believed or not believed, landed just as the Me Too movement was unfolding. And I don't even need to go into what happened after Hulu's Handmaid's Tale. I mean, yeah, what did you do? We don't want to see the soapbox, Tim. We want to see your crystal ball wherever that is under your desk. You keep that on somewhere secret. But can you talk a bit about the timing of that? Because it really was extraordinary. I mean, I remember talking to you just as that was launching, and we were laughing about Handmaid's costumes being seen, that it was bad taste that they were being seen on the catwalk, and handmade costumes as cupcakes. And within sort of post-Trump, it all of a sudden became really not funny. And I mean, you know, it would have all been so different if Clinton had got in. Yeah, your timing, go on, talk
okay,
about
your timing was, we were shooting Handmaids. We hadn't finished shooting first season of Handmaids when that election happened. And the result was that we woke up in the morning seeing that Hillary Clinton had not won, and everyone in the series said, we're in a different show. Not that anything in the show had changed, but it would be seen in a different frame. So instead of everybody thinking, well, yeah, it's a good story, and of course it's not going to happen now that Hillary Clinton has won, they said, here it comes. And it didn't actually launch until April of 2017. It didn't launch on TV, but it was being shot right at that moment. Yeah, so what can I say? I didn't do
it. As you famously have said, you didn't put anything in The Handmaid's Tale that hadn't already happened somewhere in the world already, a rule that the filmmakers adhered to as well. As one reader puts it, where does Margaret Atwood come up with all this shit? We've got various more polite iterations of that in the sidebar as well. Go on, explain yourself. Where do you come up with all this weird shit?
Not just, yeah, it's weird shit, not just shit. Shit is a dime a dozen. Weird shit is a bit rarer. I read a lot of history and newspapers, or on these days, you know, news online. And you watch stories that begin on the back pages, make their way to the front, and vice versa. And that's it. I mean, you come across incredible things in real life. And a lot of them are so extreme that you think, well, I can't put that in a book, because if I do, everybody will just think I've gone right off the edge of the cliff. So reality is always more extreme than anything you can do in fiction. I was reading Martha Gellhorn recently. She was a war correspondent in World War II. And towards the end of her life, she said, it was always worse than what I could write.
One of your favorite quotes, which is along the same lines, was, if I was to create an imaginary garden, I wanted the toads in it to be real. And it seems to me that this muddy pond is now getting overpopulated with toads. I wondered which toads you'd stick in there now.
What real things?
Toads, the men, yeah.
Yeah, that's a quote from the poet Mary Ann Moore. They said that poetry was an imaginary garden with real toads in it. So in other words, the granularity is real. The overall arching structure may well be imaginary, as novels always are, because they have endings and real life doesn't. So I think that's a veiled question. I think that's asking me what I'm writing about right now. And I never tell that. Really? Never tell it, because it may not work out.
I've touched on a couple of the burning issues right now, but if you had to choose just three, what would they be?
Climate change, but that relates to everything.
Yeah.
So it's joined at the hip with social unrest. As we've just seen in Ukraine, wars are terrible for women and children, very bad situations for them. So women's concerns, or what is thought of as women's concerns, but are actually everybody's concerns, they're connected with wars. Wars are connected with social unrest and resource grabs. And all of those are connected to changing climate. So that would be number one. Number two would be probably tackling the issue of what can we do. And we are doing a project in the fall called Practical Utopias with an online interactive platform called Disco. And for that, we're going to provide the participants with some building blocks like a Lego set. And let's see if you can build a way to live that will be carbon negative, that will be cheap enough so people can actually do it, and attractive enough so they will do it. So what are we going to eat? What sort of houses are we going to live in? Where are we going to get the energy? Where's the food going to be grown or come from? No fair, just everybody eating tofu, because that violates rule number 3. It's not attractive enough. Are we going to wear clothing made out of mushrooms? Are we going to wear clothing made out of algae grown in algae tanks? Both of these are now possible. So material build for 3 units, and then the real burning question, what kind of government do you want to have? Okay, do you want to have a monarch? Do you want to have an oligarchy? Do you want to have some form of democracy? What form? Do you want to have communal decision-making? Is that feasible if you have more than a certain number of people? So all of these are questions that we will explore jointly to come up with some hopeful answers, because the real burning question is, have we got a hope? Sometimes phrases, have we got a hope in hell? And the next question after that is, are we in hell already, or could it get worse?
You've just preempted my next question, where in one of the essays, I think the one about the zombie apocalypse, I mean, where else, what else? You run through the questions you've been asked over the decades. I love this. In the 60s, as a woman poet, you were asked, when are you going to kill yourself? In the 70s, you were asked, do you hate men? We might get back to that one. 80s writing process, we will get to that. Then The Handmaid's Tale, but most recently, is there hope? And I know I've asked you this every single time I've interviewed you, and you've just sort of touched on it now. I'm sorry for my unoriginality each time, but to quote from Oryx and Crake, as a species, we are doomed by hope. You could call it hope or desperation. And Jessica, who is studying Oryx and Crake for her A-level English, asks, how has your environmentalism changed since writing Oryx and Crake?
Well, it's become more hopeful because more people are interested in it. So since Oryx and Crake, we have actually seen the advent of Greta Thunberg and associated movements. We've seen a lot of young people, and by young I mean say under 25s, really understanding that unless we solve this, forget what's going to happen 100 years from now, because there probably won't be very many people, if any, left. To put it in a short form, don't cry, Lisa. To put it in a short form, if we destroy—
I have 3 babies.
I know. Well, never mind. We're going to fix it, Lisa. For your babies, we're going to fix it. If you destroy the oceans, away goes 60 to 80% of our oxygen source. And the result of that would be, first, we'll get quite stupid and have a lot of car crashes and be unable to work our computers. Now, if that doesn't, we'll be unable to work our cell phones, Lisa. If that doesn't motivate people, what will? And then we will just, cockroaches will be fine, they always have been. But because we require a certain amount of oxygen, we will probably not be fine.
Okay, always looking for the hope. Lara asks, Lara and Jen, we've had so many questions on this. To save our planet, David Attenborough asks everyone to plant a tree. Which one achievable action must every person do to make the critical difference to our futures, in your opinion? And Jane Leggett asks, what is the most effective non-violent direct action we can take to limit global warming?
Okay, for that, I would say tune into Practical Utopias as an observer in the fall, because these are the very things we're going to be discussing. But I think—
I've got here, would you mind talking about Practical Utopias?
Yeah, so I have talked about it now quite a bit. Yeah, so those are the questions we're going to be considering, and we will have people who have got the statistics. Like, if you do this, here would be the result. And I would refer people looking for important things that they can do to Project Drawdown. Project Drawdown has got all of the things we're already doing and showing what would happen if we did them more for a net drawdown effect of carbon out of the atmosphere. So it's all dependent, of course, on what people can do, not just on what they should do. And a lot of what they can do is dependent on their own situation. Like, do you have a job? Is your job taking 80 hours a week? Do you have any disposable income? Do you know, are you already on the edge? So it's unrealistic to expect things from people that they can't actually do. So I would say, keep it simple, keep it doable, keep it possible. And Project Drawdown can be your guide.
One thing you shouldn't do, of course, is have 3 babies. And Alice Brunton says, question from an anxious mid-30s woman. Oh, Alice, what are your thoughts on having children in these uncertain times with the worsening climate crisis? Is there enough hope to make it overall a good thing? I go back and forth.
Well, I think it's a good thing, you know, and a lot of people would die for the chance because they seem unable to have children. And let us look at the chemical reasons for that. Again, it's a question of balance. And I think children are always hopeful. It's why we get such a kick out of the nativity story, you know, oh, we can start again. And that's what we think when we look at little babies. We think, oh, they'll do it right. You know, we may have messed up, but here's a new start. They'll get it right. Of course, they're always a bit wrong about that, but never mind, it is very hopeful.
Talking of babies, I leapt ahead slightly. One of the most surreal moments of my career was the publication of the Testaments, which was so hotly guarded that in order...
Oh, yeah, that.
Yes.
Right. The guy was trying to steal it, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was not trying to, people were trying to steal it, not me.
No, in order for me... man was trying to steal it.
I know.
It was, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you. In order to be able to read it so I could interview you, I had to go into the Random House offices, and I just had a baby, so I had to take my baby with me. I had to spend 2 days sitting in a glass office with 2 members of Random House. Hello, if you're out there. They were very lovely, but still. Periodically, I wasn't allowed to take my phone to the toilet, and I had to periodically stick my baby under my blouse with these people, with these very nice girls from publicity watching me. Anyway, read this. I just thought the way I could do this is like in the films, you know, in gangster movies when they hide things in the buggy and sort of smuggle it out. But the whole thing was so bonkers. And as you say, there was a hoaxer who I want you to talk about, and I think somebody had already left the manuscript on a plane. I think Captain
That was almost me.
Go on, tell us what happened with the manuscript, the hoaxer, and yeah, it was such a palaver.
Yes, well, he had been known to be, we now know it was a he. He was a functionary in Simon & Schuster, so he knew people's email addresses, and he was emailing people with fake email addresses with just maybe one letter changed, pretending to be other people, and getting writers' manuscripts in advance of publication. And we still don't know what he was doing with them. Doesn't seem to have been blackmailing. He doesn't seem to have been publishing them. It's a mystery, and we'll have to wait for the trial, but that's what he was doing. And he almost got this one from a member of the Booker jury by pretending to be my agent.
And tell us about the role Captain Underpants plays in this. Was it Captain Underpants? I think it was.
Captain Underpants?
Leaving a manuscript on a plane?
Yeah, okay, Captain, yeah, all right. Yeah, so coming back from, I think, Scotland, with my computer, and I got my computer out, I was going to be working on my manuscript, but I got lured by a kids movie actually called Captain Underpants. And I started watching that instead, and I walked off the plane and left my computer open on the plane. Whoa. So thanks to the magic of Twitter and direct messaging, 3 lovely people in Air Canada saved the day. So instead of going online and filling out the laborious form that you're supposed to fill out if you leave something on a plane, I went on Twitter and I said, oh my God, I left something on a plane. And they got back to me by direct messaging, hopped into a car, got driven to the airport. There was one of these lovely people standing by the curb. There was my computer, and the day was saved.
And then,
yes, very stressful, I have to say.
It was released too early anyway. Then somebody at Amazon pressed the wrong button.
Yeah, that was another story. And it went out to a number of people who had pre-ordered it. So it went out before it was supposed to have, but none of those wonderful people who got it early stuck it up online. Thank you, them, whoever they may be.
I'm really aware of time and of my promise that we would get in as many audience questions as possible. I just wanted to sort of slightly whiz through your becoming a writer, because I remember you saying once, I can't remember a time when I was a usual anything. I think we were marveling at becoming a sort of literary rock star in your 80s. Not a usual child or a teenager. I was a very peculiar university student, and it's continued from there. Yeah, this unusualness. I mean, you grew up in the wilderness. You said you could have, I mean, you were called Peggy Nature. I mean, that's from a children's book, isn't it? Your dad was an early environmentalist. You didn't wear proper clothes. You could have been a scientist. Tell us about how that sort of growing up in the wilderness turned you into a writer. Thank goodness you didn't become a scientist. That would have been,
I don't know, I think it would have been pretty interesting.
Goodness knows what you might have invented. I think it's better that it's bad enough what you've managed to do just with a keyboard.
I found an old letter of mine from when we were living in France. I was writing Alias Grace, I think, and I'd come back from England doing some literary thing, and I was feeling rather mournful, and I said to Graham, why is it that tell me a good reason why anybody should write? And he said, I'm the wrong person to ask, because I feel that way most days anyway. So I phoned up another friend of mine, his name was Matt Cohen, and I said, why should we be writing? And he gave it some thought, and he said that the best reason he could think of was that as long as writers were writing, they weren't out on the streets causing mischief, as they would otherwise do. So how did all of that happen? I don't think that I became a writer because of my peculiar upbringing. There are lots of people who have become writers with very different kinds of upbringing. I think the thing that they all usually have in common is that they have been readers. So they have been avid readers at some point in their life, avid readers of something or other, even if it's only comic books. And they want to become storytellers or poets, and they start doing it because it interests them a lot. And that is in fact what happened to me in high school. I love my third form, I guess it is. I don't know about the forms in England, but what we would call grade 11. Teacher, his name was Miss Florence Smedley. And they went back to make a documentary after a while when I was kind of famous, and asked her what I had been like as a student of hers. And she told the truth. You know, mostly they don't. Oh yes, I knew right away she was a genius. That's not what Miss Florence Smedley said. She said, she showed no particular ability in my class. That's true, I didn't. I didn't show ability until I got to Miss Bessie Billings, who was the next one. And she was a person of wide literary interests. In those days, they didn't let women teach in universities much. So we had all these really smart high school teachers who were female. And she made the famous remark after she read a poem of mine. She said, I don't know what this means at all, dear, so it must be good.
Yeah. You became a writer crossing a football pitch. I mean, I swear nothing good has happened to me on any sort of sports field ever. I mean, how does...
There wasn't anybody else on it. It wasn't in the middle of the game.
An audience, while we're talking about reading, where was it? An audience member asked, give us your names. How important do you think speculative fiction is for us today? And how do you have any favorite new writers in this genre?
Well, there's a whole hunk of them coming on stream, and a lot of them are women, and they're writing, let us call them relatives of the Handmaid's Tale. Younger relatives of the Handmaid's Tale, and I recommend one called Red Clocks right now. I can't quite remember who wrote it, but you will be able to find it quite easily. And that is essentially an escape story. And you are going to be seeing some of those coming out of the United States now. There will doubtless be an underground network for women escaping from coercive states that want to conscript them. So let us see how those plots play out.
So,
they're making a series of Naomi Alderman's The Power, by the way.
You've written, my maths is not my strong point, but I think it works out that you've written nearly a book a year for over 6 decades. I mean, how do you do that? Go on, what's your superpower? I mean, also you haven't just written books, you've made paintings, you've made ballets, plays. I mean, you know, how do you do it?
How do I do it? Well, I think it probably comes from being a workaholic, and there are a lot of other things I don't do that other people do, which takes up their time. So I don't do those things, and instead I'm a workaholic, and I'm from the workaholic 50s generation, and we're just all workaholics.
There's a quote which in every interview I do, I always quote you at the end, and sometimes I even do it in a Canadian accent, which I'm not going to do now.
Let's hear it. We want to hear it.
But it started a thing. I think I might turn this into a book of where I ask people. I once asked you how you would describe yourself as a writer. It's going to come out in a terrible Canadian accent. And you said, I'm a downhill skier. I get to the bottom. And since then, I've asked everybody to describe themselves as a writer. And Kazuo Ishiguro, who has this wonderful one, he says he's a samurai warrior. He spends sort of 2 years just sort of psyching out his opponents, and then he elegantly. And Jonathan Franzen very sweetly said he was a knitter. He spends ages knitting. And then
I wonder if he's ever actually knitted anything. Actually done real knitting.
But anyway, it's so wonderful. And as I say, it has launched this thing. And you also talk about something called a rolling barrage technique, whatever that is. But we get the idea.
I'll tell you what that is.
So tell us about skiing and rolling barraging, and how you actually... And this makes it sound very spontaneous, but I know you've got a pinboard with all dates.
No, I don't have.
How do you do it?
Post-it notes. You don't need an actual pinboard. So yeah, right. How do I do it? Well, I start at the beginning, which usually isn't the beginning. It's usually some other scene somewhere else. So the main thing is to start. And if you want all those tips, you can find my brain dump, which is on Masterclass, in which I say everything I know about writing, and that's it. I emptied out my head, and how I personally write is not how necessarily anyone else should do it. They have to develop their own techniques, but having come from the cursive handwriting generation and never having learned to properly touch type, I start with the cursive handwriting, which is relatively illegible. So that can cause problems. I can't actually read what I wrote, but I can make a good guess at it. And then I start typing that. Thank you, whoever invented personal computers. I can correct my own typing mistakes. And I start typing the handwriting while writing more at the beginning. So rolling barrage is from the First World War. So you run forward, your artillery shoots, you run forward and count and duck down, and your artillery shoots over your head. If you get the numbers wrong, you're going to get your head blown off. but that's not part of the writing metaphor.
You're only writing a book.
Yes, yes, true. And then once that's happened, you stand up, you run forward again, you duck down and shoot over the head. But it's only really applicable in World War I. I don't think they're doing that anymore. They're doing drones instead.
Study. That was to answer questions from Helsinki, and they say, what is the best writing event? And thank you for your books. They've given me so much pleasure. So hello in Helsinki. I feel like I'm part of the Eurovision Song Contest. You don't need to know about that.
I do know about that. I know about that. I know Helsinki. Hello, Helsinki.
Hello.
Over there again someday.
There's a wonderful exchange in the back of one of the essays where about tips for young writers, and you go into a cafe and the cafe owner says, is it talent? And you say yes, but you have to work hard. And then he says, but it's also passion. And then you say yes, and then as you go, he says good luck, and you say, oh, good luck, that's the next thing we need. So talent, hard work, passion, and good luck. Is there anything else you would add?
Well, there's a lot of practical things. Do you want practical things? Work on your posture, and then you won't get terrible backaches later on. I speak from experience. It helps if you know how to touch type, but you can get by without it, as I clearly demonstrate. So these are all, practical things. And what you need to know probably these days is things about agents, which never crossed my mind in the 60s because nobody in Canada had any. An overview of the publishing scene. And I will refer you to a forthcoming book by Cory Doctorow, which is about how artists make money and how their ability to make money has been impinged upon by big tech, and steps that they can do to attempt to reverse that trend. So these are all part of the writing landscapes, like where do you publish, who's going to publish you, who are your readers, how do you reach your readers, and these, and how are you going to support yourself, supposing you don't get the $1 million advance first crack, which very few people do. In fact, almost nobody does. In fact, who does? So how are you going to support yourself while you're writing? That's another very practical question, etc. and so forth. You have to think about them all if you're going to actually do this.
In the same essay, you write, all writers have teachers, sometimes alive, more often dead. Who were your teachers?
Well, there are quite a few. So going, how far back do you want to go?
Not right. Yeah, I know you're with history for you, you go back to sort of prehistory.
Well, I sometimes say Beatrix Potter, but she is a very elegant writer and very oblique.
She does. There's soporific in Peter Rabbit. I mean, try running soporific past a sort of 5-year-old.
Oh, they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yes, they do figure things out very quickly.
She was also quite evil, picking sort of carcasses of small animals apart and things.
That wasn't evil. They were already dead. You're speaking to the wrong person.
I realize that.
That's with the Christmas turkey. Anyway, yeah, so I just boiled a skunk skull for my grandchild. He found it in a trash heap and it was all sort of gooey and, brown and purple and green. And so we needed to clean it. So how do you clean a skull that's all gooey like that? So first you boil it several times and you put some vinegar or bleach in, or one after the other. And if you do that enough, it'll come out beautifully white.
There you go. That's up there with how to dodge a crocodile. Go on, who are your teachers? And then please keep your questions coming because we don't have.
You're going to have to boil some skulls in your lifetime, Lisa. So it's a good thing that I told you how to do it. And what you're not supposed to say is throw that yucky thing out. Very discouraging to a young scientist.
Okay. After Beatrix Potter.
After Beatrix Potter, I read a lot of sci-fi in the 50s. and read George Orwell quite early in my life, major influence, I would say. Read a lot of quite long Victorian novels early on in the days when it was not thought beyond the capabilities of teenagers to read long Victorian novels. And then a lot of modern, what was then modern literature. So literature of the 20th century up to about 1965, a lot of French existentialists. In the day, they were big news in the early 60s. So what else can I tell you?
That's
quite a lot more. I continue to read these. A lot of military history.
Hence the rolling barrage.
Well, that's just a tip of the iceberg. So, and a lot of books about totalitarianisms, which of course feed into the Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, I was hoping your bookcases were going to be like mine, because I think you've probably got a witchy shelf, a Black Death shelf, a totalitarian shelf.
Yeah, I do.
A baddies shelf.
And I also have a huge fairy tale and folklore couple of shelves. Very, very useful. And I do have especially Salem witchcraft trials, but witchcraft things in general. And I can put that down to the fact that I wasn't allowed into the Lamont Library when I was a graduate student at Harvard because it was only for boys. And the modern poetry was in there. So instead, I hung out in the stacks of the Widener Library, and the witchcraft and demonology stuff was in there. So I'd say good trade.
Jess, and I'm going to try and rattle through as many as possible. Jess, an English teacher from London, asks, how do you think feminism is best taught in schools? And I recently read that the Handmaid's Tale is banned in certain US states.
And quite rightly so. There's disturbing material in it. Yeah, somebody said to me, so what do you think when somebody tells you that your book has been banned? And my rather flippant answer was, more sales. It's a great way to get more sales, is to just advertise the fact that your book has been banned, because then everyone wants to see what's so bad about it. Yes, that's a naughty answer. What was the real question?
How do you think feminism is best taught?
Okay. So there's 75 different kinds of feminism, and you need to know which kind you're talking about before you can teach anything about it at all. So the kind that I'm interested in has to do with equal civil rights for everybody. That's the kind that interests me. But all sorts of things interest other people. So I think you need to narrow the focus a bit and decide just exactly what you want to teach how. But if you just want to introduce people to the general idea that women are human beings, that's a good beginning. And another good beginning is we're all influenced by the historical period in which we find ourselves, and we really have no way out of it. So what are the norms? You know, what was it that you were expected to be and do in any given time period? And that's pretty interesting too. It influences everything, including the resolutions of murder mysteries.
An audience member is asking about being related to Mary Webster. This is picking up from our witchy thing. And I absolutely love your line where you say related to Mary Webster, and they hung her as a witch, but she remained unhung. She was still alive the following morning. And that's a good neck to have if you're going to stick your neck out. A good inherited neck to have if you're going to stick your neck out if you are done. Mary Webster.
We don't actually know. So Granny would say on Mondays that we were descended from her, and on Wednesday she would change her mind. But we don't know whether that's true or not unless we know about how many children she had. So we know that she married this guy called Webster, and we were definitely related to him. But whether she then had progeny is not known to me. And if she didn't have any, then of course I couldn't be descended from her. But let's say we're related to the same family. So Daniel Webster, the lawyer, Noah Webster, the dictionary guy, Governor John Webster of Connecticut, all those New England Websters, those would be the same Websters that gave rise to my grandmother, whose maiden name was Webster.
Alan Hooper, what is your unfulfilled fantasy? We've got to do this like speed dating now.
My unfulfilled fantasy, well, I just think it would be wonderful to be an opera singer like Joan Sutherland, but I'm not, so it will never be fulfilled.
Claire in Bath asks, I wonder if you could say something about what brings you joy or makes you happy. Thank you, Claire in Bath.
Well, I think that joy and happiness are byproducts of doing what you like to do. So when you're doing something you like to do, you generally feel happy. But if you set out to do those things thinking, I'm only doing this so it will make me happy, then you probably won't be, because your expectations are too high. So the real secret to joy and happiness is really low expectations. It's so much better than I thought it was going to be, because I thought it was going to be just crap. I feel so happy, it's better.
In the Testaments, Aunt Lydia says only dead people are allowed to have statues, but I've been given one still alive. And there's a wonderful piece in the book about you and Alice Munro laughing about a bronze statue of Munro. Now, I think there's an Atwood statue lurking out there, and you've been turned into a stamp.
Yes, well, I think stamps are better. They're sort of more democratic. Yes, the stamp was great, and it was lots of fun to do the launch for the stamp, because it came through that little interlude between Delta and Omicron, when people were actually feeling they could go out again, and people came to this event and they were positively giddy. They were just so happy to be at something, even though it was a stamp launch. So it was pretty hilarious, and yeah. I'll send you one, Lisa.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, a stamp.
I've got a Gruffalo stamp
with my stamp on it.
At an event we did a while back, an audience member asked the question, if you could have one word to sum up the times we're living in, what would it be? And I've got it written down what you said, but I wonder if it would be the same. You can have a different.
Chaotic, worrisome, yes, dismaying, a time of pivots and movement, all of those. Everything's changing very rapidly, that's what we can say. So we go through certain periods where things feel quite static, and you think, well, things are pretty stable. We're living in unstable times.
Sandra Hicks, this is probably the last question. I think that they'll shout at me over the internet if we have to stop, if they pull us. But Sandra Hicks, why do narcissists keep getting elected into positions of power, especially global leaders, and how do we remedy the situation for the greater good?
Well, you know the old saying that anybody who wants to be leader should not be elected as such. Yeah, I don't, it's a whole different breed of people. And somebody once tried to get me to run for mayor of Toronto. Did you know that, Lisa?
Well,
I said, Bill Kilbourne wants me to run for mayor of Toronto. And Graham thought for a minute and he said, that would be a very Norman Mailer-ish thing to do. That was the end of that. Yeah, on the one hand, you admire people who are willing to put themselves out there. But on the other hand, you wonder, why are you doing this? And it can be many different reasons. So I do know a number of people who've done it because they really wanted to help improve things, often at the municipal level or the provincial level. But wow, yes. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. You can say that occasionally people get elected and their moment comes, like their moment. And I know all the naughty things and bad things about Churchill, but that was his moment. That was what he was good at, was being war leader in World War II. He may not have been particularly good at anything else, but he was good at that. And Zelensky is a completely unexpected figure. This is his moment. you wouldn't have said ahead of time that he would have turned into this world leader. You wouldn't have guessed it. But there he is, and really rather puts to shame a number of the other world leaders, I have to say.
I'm going to take that as a hopeful note on which to end it. I think that sounds about right. We are out of time. I have a whole pile of questions here, both from me and from other people. If you haven't read it yet, it's wonderful. There are also, you've mentioned him lots of times in the conversation, lots of the most personal writing I think I've read from you about your husband, Graham Gibson. And there's so much in here. Not all of them were me begging and pleading for them, but I'm rather pleased that I did. I would like to end with the last lines from the speech you gave called Greetings, Earthlings. You can imagine it in a Canadian accent, if you like, or an alien in mischievous old lady disguise, which was the voice in which it was written, aka Margaret Atwood. So broadcast into the nation here. Earthlings, behave yourselves. Have fun when possible. Avoid totalitarianisms, enjoy the cat videos, read up on human rights, eat lots of kale, get rid of single-use plastic. Farewell until we meet again. Margaret, it's been a joy. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, I've got to say some stuff. I've shown the book. We'd love to hear from you thought of this. So if you enjoyed it, please say nice things about us. We can come back and do it again sometime. Margaret, it's always a pleasure, and I hope to see you again in real life, hopefully sometime soon.
I'm sure that we will do that, Lisa. I intend to come over in the spring. Okay, this time it's a date. I'll see you then. Okay. I'll be in touch. I'll try not to send too many begging emails. Please, please, please. Goodbye. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Bye.